evolution is the cause of life, so we don't need a God for anything. And that's what's taught in our public schools. And kids are getting depressed, anxious, suicidal. It's really a tragedy.
Welcome to Real Science Radio. Today we welcome Tom Rogers, founder of the Atomic Biology Institute and author of the book God's Biology, Darwin's Replacement. We're diving into a revolutionary approach to understanding life, not from the cells down, but from atoms up.
That's right. And Fred, for those who think science and the Bible can't coexist, or if science has you questioning your faith, today's conversation is one that you will want to hear. So let's start at the top, Tom. What is atomic biology, and how is it different from traditional microbiology?
Here's the difference, and it's all about who is stacking the atoms to make every living cell, okay? I started this as a curiosity like 3 decades ago. And as I put things together, it got more and more fascinating. But it started with this idea from grade 5 science that material things are made of atoms, okay? All material things are made of atoms, including our skin, our cheekbones, our everything. And so there's where the atoms come in now. The next thing is that when you start stacking atoms into living cells, it takes way more intelligence than mankind has, okay? Because man's been trying for over 70 years to make a living cell out of atoms, and we cannot come anywhere close. The best lab is probably J. Craig Venter's lab. He's involved with the Human Genome Project, and he can make a copy of little pieces of a cell and transplant them into a living cell. But with our vast accumulation of scientific knowledge over the centuries and our sophisticated equipment, highly sophisticated equipment, we cannot come close to making a living cell. And God is doing that by the billions, like every second of every day for every one of us.
Really? Every second of every day by the billions?
By the billions, absolutely.
Billions and billions.
What do you mean?
Well, my favorite example that turned me from a part-time curiosity to full-time investigation and research was looking at red blood cells. And a fellow by the name of Pallister says that a 150-pound male, as his example, okay, a 150-pound male gets about 2.3 million new red blood cells every second, okay?
Whoa, wait.
Okay.
Every second? You mean like 1,001?
Yeah.
Okay.
So our red blood cells do wear out in about 120 days, whether male or female, it's about the same. And they have to be replaced with new ones because they quit absorbing oxygen efficiently and delivering that to all parts of our body through our bloodstream. And they have to pick up carbon dioxide, bring that back and expel it through our breath. So that's what red blood cells are doing, as well as delivering other nutrients and so on all over our body. So for a 150-pounder, about 2.3 million new red blood cells every second, 24/7. Now, a fellow by the name of Tortora says that every single red blood cell has about 280 million molecules of hemoglobin. And Max Perut says every molecule of hemoglobin has about 10,000 correct atoms. Correct. atoms. So these have to be found, sorted, selected, counted, and precisely placed to the tune of 6,400 quadrillion correct atoms per second, 24/7. So, okay, this is just for our red blood cells. You can take your own weight, put it over 150. Okay, so let's say you're 200 pounds, you put that over 150, multiply it times 6,400 quadrillion, and that's how many atoms God is working with for your red blood cells. Okay, so
you're
just an
saying that
idea.
God's having to work. You're saying that God's having to work with a lot more red blood cells on me than probably you and Doug. Probably
Yeah,
close to that 200-pound male, or even a little more, but not much more. But
yeah, okay.
Well, listen,
God works
Fred,
harder for me than he works for you guys.
say that again, Fred.
God works harder for me than he does you guys.
We might have to check out those numbers.
Yeah.
Well, and so Fred, we will put the equation in the show summary on the website, but that's pretty mind-boggling. But I think I heard you say in your description, I think you let the cat out of the bag as to what is causing all these atoms to come together properly. It's obviously, you said selection. They have to be selected.
Right.
And so obviously that's natural selection, right?
Oh, no. Natural selection doesn't have any intelligence to use. The evolutionists make a big point of that no intelligence is used in the evolutionary process. And that's
That is
where
true.
they're so far off base. And I quote an honest evolutionist from Harvard, biology professor, and this quote is worth hearing because this is where the problem comes from. It's this worldview, and if I can indulge you for a minute here, this is Richard Lewontin, Harvard professor of biology, evolutionary biology. We take the side of evolutionary science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just so stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. And moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Bottom line, we cannot allow a divine foot in the door, and that's what public education biology is all about.
And Lewontin said it. Lewontin said it in writing. That's written down, right? That's not just something
That's from
you haven't just made that up.
no, it's from a article he did about billions and billions of demons. That was the title of the article. And
Oh, billions and billions of demons. Okay, well, I'm gonna look that up and so because I want to give another quote from Lewontin from the last chapter of his book, Biology as Ideology.
right,
That's his book. So, not to put too fine a point on what you just said, but the name of the title of his book is Biology as Ideology. He argued that while traditional Darwinism has portrayed the organism as a passive recipient of environmental influences, the correct understanding in his mind is that we should emphasize, science teachers and educators should emphasize the organism as an active constructor of its own environment. So Lewontin argued with the evolutionists, if it's possible, from an even more godless position, because he's basically affirming Romans 1:25, being one of those who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshiped and served the creature more than the creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. And so, Tom, you're quoting Lewontin, who is an icon of, I think, neo-Darwinism. When Darwinism became too ridiculous and the math just didn't work for so many years, there was a pivot to this so-called neo-Darwinism, in which now the creature itself is somehow the center of the intelligence in order to create itself. But you're describing an intelligence that's far beyond the possession of any creature, at least from what I hear.
Yes, that's right. And scientists have been trying for over 70 years to make a living cell out of elements. And we can't come close, even with all this vast accumulation of scientific knowledge, highly sophisticated equipment. And the best that can be done at the moment is the J. Craig Venter lab, where he can actually copy little pieces of a cell, of an existing living cell. He can copy a little piece, transplant it into another living cell that keeps on living. That's as close as we can get. But
Okay, but you know what he can do? He can then publish a paper talking about what he's doing, and then that paper is presented by the scientific establishment and educators as if he's done something. And that's what they do.
Yes. Now, Venter himself is honest enough to say that they are not creating life in the lab, even though a lot of evolutionists say that that's what's happening, but it's not. And that's a very important distinction. The other part of this is that evolutionists are saying that no intelligence is needed. I mean, as you probably know, people like Discovery Institute have been taken to court along with the school that tried to introduce intelligent design, and been shut down, basically, the intelligent design part, because the evolutionists want to stick with this idea that no intelligence is needed because their process doesn't have any. Okay. So that's a very important point here.
Yes, and Lewontin let the cat out of the bag when he said we can't have any. We can't, because that would point to God, and he's terrified of God.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, this is because they are deceived. Okay, so I decided that we don't talk enough about public enemy number one, old Satan himself, because I think that he picked up on Darwin's concept of no intelligence needed, and that is now used to separate our students from their creator. Evolution is the cause of life, so we don't need a God for anything. And that's what's taught in our public schools. And kids are getting depressed, anxious, suicidal. It's really a tragedy because number one, their moral compass has been removed back in 1983. And they're
So
not
1963?
Pardon me, 63, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and
what happened in 1963 that changed things?
You may remember the name Madeleine Murray O'Hair. And in 1963, she and some of her atheist friends convinced the Supreme Court of the United States to remove the reciting of the Lord's Prayer and Bible reading from public school classrooms. And almost immediately, like you young guys, you maybe weren't around then. I was. Okay. And what started happening, I don't know if you heard of Woodstock, but the kids started going nuts with LSD was the big drug of the day, and this idea of free love, sex for everybody, no holds barred. The moral compass is gone, and of course there are a lot of unwanted babies, and then with that some deadbeat dads. The anxiety, depression of the mothers and their parents, and things just started going downhill. Kids got suicidal, and without our moral compass, kids don't have a guidepost, and their parents, if they got good parents, that can certainly be a help, but. In our higher education, post-secondary education now, the stats say, and I think this is from Barna, that about 75% of the students that entered college or university with their belief in God intact, belief in Jesus intact, they're graduating without it. That's getting persuaded out of 75% of the Christians that entered college are graduating without their belief. So I see millions of souls being lost because of this false teaching that the Bible warns us about.
I've been busy trying to find a quote from Thomas Huxley. He was Darwin's bulldog. I haven't found it, but it's basically paraphrasing something like, the beauty of Darwinism is just unleashing our ability to just do whatever we want with sex, and so that allowed him to have this worldview to try to justify whatever behavior he wanted to do. Another thing about 1963 or thereabouts, I was given a talk at a Lutheran high school some years ago, and the biology teacher, who was a young Earth creationist, he had mentioned something that was really interesting to me, and I confirmed it afterwards, that another thing they were doing was pushing evolution into the textbooks. And the logic they were using was, well, the Russians are ahead of us in the space war, and so we're behind on science. We need to get more science in the textbooks. And so at the same time they're taking prayer out of the out of the schools, they're also injecting the theory of evolution. And those two effects combined over time just had a huge moral impact on our society. In fact, we're showing some slides right now that show the different things that have happened over time. The divorce rate.
And leaders like Hitler that were big believers in evolution, and Darwin unfortunately was a racist, as you probably know.
Yeah.
And he condoned this idea of superior races and so on. And Hitler picked up on that, and then hence the Holocaust.
It was in the title of his book, the favored races, the origin of species. And then, a lot of times they don't show you that his subtitle.
Oh, yeah, they leave that out. I call it subtle Satan's powerful ploy to separate students from their creator by the use of Darwinisms as the origin and cause of life. Okay, no God needed.
Yeah.
All wrong. All wrong.
No God wanted.
Yeah.
No God wanted. And so you asked a question when you sent me some notes before the show. The question you asked that I think you want to pose to teachers is it important to teach students the truth about life?
Absolutely.
Okay, and so any rational person would immediately answer, yes, it's important to teach children about the truth. So how is it that if everybody answers yes to that question, including the teachers in every single public school, if you asked every single teacher, is it important to teach children the truth about life, they would say yes. So how is it that most of them are not? How does that happen?
Well, first of all, the teaching of evolution is compulsory. And you may have heard of a documentary called Expelled, No Intelligence
Yes.
Allowed, with Ben Stein leading and showing the causes of professors in university who dared to suggest to their students that there may be some intelligence in the way living things are made. Out the door. Not a rap on the knuckles. Don't say that to your class anymore. You're fired. And that's the penalty. Now, I see today there is an actual fear of leaving evolution out of the picture. So hence you get, people like Francis Collins with Biologos and so on, trying to combine evolution with a creator, okay? Theistic evolution, evolutionary creation. And evolution is an unguided process. That's the whole point that they're teaching. It's an unguided process according to their doctrine. And so how can you have a guided by God, unguided process? It's like mixing oil and water. It doesn't work.
Yeah, it's sad. It's sad to see
But there's
Christians.
fear. There is this fear
Yeah.
of leaving evolution out of the picture. And that's got to change. It's this deception, and that's Satan at work for sure. And
Yeah.
we're going to start talking about him a bit more because he's a troublemaker.
Yeah. And so, Tom, you mentioned that these people are deceived, and that's very kind of you. I think that, we can all be deceived when we're children because we don't know anything. But once you become an adult, there comes a point where you're no longer deceived. You're now a deceiver. And so a lot of the people in the government schools who are teaching children lies about their origins, they're not just deceived, they're deceivers.
Yeah.
And so teaching the truth to children for the lost. And I think in government mandated education, I think it's a requirement that you be lost. It's required that you do not know Jesus Christ, that you're not familiar with the Bible, and you're certainly never going to bring that up. And so for the lost, teaching the truth is not as important as justifying their own sin. And so if you're not, I don't know if this is even legal to say this in Canada. If you're not a Christian, you're not qualified to be a teacher. You've disqualified yourself from being a teacher. But we live in a world where the exact opposite is being enforced, like you said, by mandate.
Yeah. Here's another situation. Nobody yet, we're just starting to teach atomic biology, okay? So this is not widely known. So far as most people are concerned, evolution is the cause of life because they haven't learned anything else. And there isn't an alternative. Now, I like the Discovery Institute guys a lot. I've been a member there for years. And they wouldn't even mention God by name until about 2 years ago. And then Steve Meyer came out with his book called The Return of the God Hypothesis. That's as close as they would come, out of fear, okay? Because they've been shot at and hit a couple of times. So this idea of a God-based life science has not been really preached in detail anywhere. Like there is creation science, but they, to my knowledge, do not talk about the necessary, essential finding, sorting, selecting, counting, precisely placing all of the correct atoms for every living cell. And the other part is that atoms don't have life of their own. They have supplied energy, okay, which leads us to omnipresence. There's no perpetual motion without the addition of energy. So every atom, all the electrons have a controlled supplier of energy to keep them moving perpetually forever. Okay, so God is the only one that can do that. So this is where his omnipresence comes in. He's in every atom. Okay, just another sideline.
Well, and talk to us about this now. So we've talked about the government schools. We've talked about the mandates against the logic and science of creation. But you have something ready and waiting to replace all that.
That's right.
Am I right?
That's correct. That's correct. We have what we call the Darwin's Replacement Series, and we have a textbook. This one that you mentioned, it's God's Biology, Darwin's Replacement, and we have some booklets. This is thin, cheap, and a good introduction.
Okay.
Right?
God is in the grocery store.
I want people to get the idea and understanding that when they go in and they see all the peas and carrots and apples and oranges and things, that God made that for their life. And if he didn't, there wouldn't be any food and there wouldn't be any life. So that's how serious this whole thing is. But we need some help now. Like we've done this on our own ticket for some decades now. And it's about 17 years full time. And we need help to broadcast this. So we appreciate so much what you fellows are doing with Real Science Radio. This is exactly what is now needed on a broad scale to get this message out there so that people know, yeah, there is a God-based life science, and it's the only one that really works.
So that one is God is in the grocery store. So God is also the author of food. And so before we wrap this up, I did want to ask Doug a question. So we want to do the interesting fact of the week.
Hi.
And
we almost forgot.
Yeah, I'll try to tie it to food. I'm not quite sure how, but so Doug, I'll give you an option. So I've got one here on sharks, and I don't know how edible sharks are, so I don't know how it ties into food.
It's pretty good.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Do you prefer a question between sharks or birds? And I know that you might have your producer there by your side. If she's there, it's going to be cheating, but...
Yeah, that's right. So I don't want to take advantage of the fact that I have the bird whisperer right here over my shoulder. So let's go with sharks.
It's one of the times that Doug got the interesting fact of the week correct because he had the bird whisperer next to him.
That's right.
Okay, so then I'm going to go with the shark one.
Yeah.
Okay, so how many bones do sharks have in their bodies? And you can be within, 1,000, let's say. Well, no, I'm going to make it harder. So you have to be within 500. How many bones do sharks have in their bodies?
Okay. So, Fred, I've never even thought that this question would ever be asked. So...
Does it depend what they've eaten?
Yeah. If sharks, you say sharks are delicious. Do you have you ever had to pick bones out?
No, I've never had shark on the bone. I've always had the bone out variety because I only eat fish if it's been deep fried because that's just the way I am. How many sharks? How many bones does a shark have? I'm guessing it's not very many. Okay.
Okay.
I'm just guessing that based on the fact that you started at 1,000 and went to 500, and you're probably trying to mislead me by making me think a shark has a lot of bones, when in fact a shark doesn't have a lot of bones. So I'm going to say about 143.
But Doug, you were close actually. If you'd have kept going with your train of logic, a shark has 0 bones.
0?
They have powerful, flexible cartilage.
Wow.
Oh, shark cartilage. I
Oh,
buy
that's
that
right.
I take that in pills.
Yeah.
Now, wait a second now. I just want everyone to know that I thought the cartilage was like, I have cartilage too, but I have that in addition to bones.
Yeah.
Who would have ever thought that God was wise enough, because he knew the shark needed that flexibility, he'd just forego the bones altogether and say, hey, this cartilage works great.
Yeah.
Wow.
So again, your book is God's Biology, Darwin's Replacement. So that's like a textbook format that would be good for what level of kids? Would it be high
Well,
school?
I would say from grade 11 up through college, university. But
Yeah.
for the rest of the people, the God's in the grocery store, pretty simple. And then the latest one is just being the proof's just coming out this week, and that's called uh, God's Given Reasons for Gratitude, Praise, and Joy.
Oh,
We
wow.
can be joyful that He does all this work for us at no charge just because He loves us and is reliable, consistent, and 24/7. He
Amen.
loves us.
And so, Tom, just for our homeschooling audience, and Tom, we have a lot of our audience are homeschoolers and are now getting into second and third generation homeschooling.
Good.
And so, for all of you homeschoolers in the audience, 11th grade through college, to you that means starting in about sixth grade, just so you know. So, you could probably start your kids out at about sixth grade. And Tom, you just mentioned something that I think really gets to the heart of all of this. And it's something that Paul taught us in the book of Romans. In chapter 1, he talks about the people who determined in their own minds not to retain God. They decided not to retain God in their own mind, and they were not thankful. And so their foolish heart was darkened. And you just mentioned the new book that's coming out talks about thankfulness. And my whole life, I've been a project for God. God has been trying to teach me to be thankful. And for your organization to pursue a scientific, educational text that focuses on thankfulness, I mean, I'm just thankful for that. How long has this new project been in the works?
Well, this was just written in the last couple of months, actually, and it's just 30 pages. And I'm hoping that church denominations will give this to each one of their congregants. Okay, cheap enough. Like we hope to be able to deliver these in bulk for $5, and somebody at the church, if it's not a mega church, but a regular like 100 people church, somebody can write that check themselves. Somebody in the congregation, if they think this is worthwhile, they can do that. It doesn't even have to be the church, but the church should be able to do it too.
Yeah,
And
and the mega church should be able to write that check.
yeah,
Just not to. I don't want to put too much pressure on the mega church pastors, but you
yeah.
guys could probably afford it too, just so you know.
Well, yeah, because they've got so many supporters, right? And they're doing great. But the numbers are dropping, as you probably know. Church attendance overall is dropping, and sometimes it's people leaving a small church to go to a bigger one, but some are just walking away because they've heard for 6 decades that evolution's the cause of life. So what do we need God for, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's taking its toll. It's really taking its toll. So I'd like to bring up a point here, a key point, and this is what I'm trying to get other groups of Christians in science to focus on, and that is the fact that God is already a big part of government. Okay, now people might say, "What are you talking about?" However, here's why. So the government has national holidays of Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving Day. They've got God in their declarations, pledges of allegiance, all the state constitutions, and other places in those documents. They have God on public buildings, currencies, war memorials, and more. So God is already highly recognized by the government. Okay, students have the inalienable. My co-author in Australia says they have the inalienable right, to quote part of the U.S. Doctrine under Jefferson, the inalienable right to be taught why God is so highly recognized by their government. Okay, so that's another point we're trying to make. God's already a part of the government. Big
Yeah.
use it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and so God is the author of government. God is the one who created the idea of human government, the idea of borders between nations, the idea of a justice system. God is the author of all of that. And so obviously the government needs to respect their author because, you know, Paul tells us that people who serve in the government, they're God's ministers for good. That's what they're supposed to be, is God's ministers for good. But because Darwin's foot was allowed in the door, among other things, I'm sure, but Darwin's foot was a big foot. The governing officials who serve in the bureaucracy of the education system, they're no longer ministers for good on the part of God. And so I just want to, you wanted to make a salient point. I want to make a salient point about this whole idea about government education. You know, a long time ago in America and in Canada, back when we were all farmers, it probably was, and we all were Christians, at least most of us, or at least biblically literate. I don't know that the majority was ever Christian, but the majority was at least biblically literate and had a respectable fear of God if they weren't actually Christians. It probably made sense for the community to organize around the idea of education because most people were not educated. Up until the late 1800s, the majority of people didn't even know how to read out in the country anyway. And so it made sense to organize around a community and to start a community school but you know, that the responsibility for educating a child lies with that child's father exclusively, according to the Bible. It's the father's responsibility to educate the child. And so that something that seemed to make sense a long time ago, back when we didn't have access to educational material and literature, and now that everybody knows how to read. Anyway, the idea that morphed from a community organization that was generally organized around the church, typically, and the families, how that morphed into a government-mandated bureaucracy, we should understand and take responsibility for the fact that that was a mistake. And we shouldn't worship our forefathers. Our forefathers made a mistake in allowing the government to move into the education of our children. And for the folks in our audience, Tom, for 30 years, we've been telling people, get your children out of the government schools. Don't try to reform the government schools. Don't try to make the schools better, because the idea of the government educating your child is anti-Christ. It's ungodly, the idea that the government should educate your children. And so, because we have a large homeschooling contingent, we're excited about your program. And for all the poor people caught up in the government system, that obviously we're not going to end government education tomorrow. So, Tom, we just pray that you can get as much of this information into as many of those government institutions as you can, to try to rescue some out.
Absolutely.
Well, I have confidence that once there is this truth about life and how it's made and maintained and sustained by a super intelligent entity, and there's only one, okay, that once teachers and professors know this, and they have a conscience, they're self-respecting, they're not going to want to keep lying to their students. I believe that that's true. Once they get the truth, they won't want to keep lying to their students, at least the majority. So I hope I'm right there.
They need the truth. That's absolutely, without the truth, they will have no conscience, and they will lie, and they do lie, and they're doing it every single day. So until they hear the gospel and believe it, there's probably not much hope, because, as I said at the very beginning, for a lost person, the obligation to justify their own sin takes precedence over every other obligation to any other truth. And so having a bunch of godless heathens employed by the government to educate your children is a terrible idea. And we appreciate you being out there trying to show the light of the truth, Tom, because atomic biology is pretty mind-boggling in its sophistication, and that requirement for superintelligence, that can't be denied by anyone, no matter what their bent or stripe.
Okay, so Tom, can you give us, I don't know, a really quick last-second explanation of why atomic biology matters? I know we've already covered that, but if you had to just give one last thought on it, and then also we'd like to know where, our listeners and people watching on YouTube, where they can learn more about your work or support your educational efforts.
Okay, well, I would remind people that we do have an enemy, and he's a great deceiver, and he's been used. I think it's his idea to use evolution in the public education system to separate students from their creator. Okay? And it's deceiving, and it's disrupting, confusing, upsetting for students, and it's got to change. We got to bring truth back to public education, all education, as far as life is concerned. And so that is, I think, a major point. People can go to our atomic biology website or God's biology website. We need help of all kinds. We need people like yourselves to spread the word. We need now some money for advertising. I'd like to hire some staff so we can make this, work sooner rather than later, because souls are being lost like every day, and that trend has to be reversed.
Well, thanks,
Amen.
Tom. Thanks for coming on Real Science Radio. This is, of course, valuable stuff. Like you said, millions of souls have been lost since, they pushed, evolution into schools in 1963 and took prayer out of the school, took God out of the school. So atomic biology is a better way of looking at biology. We appreciate all your efforts in this area and the educational tools you are providing our community. Greatly appreciate it.
Amen. And God bless you, brother, for bringing up the devil, because the devil's real, and for reminding us to be thankful about the fact that God cares for us every single day. And despite the fact that he's super intelligent and he has a lot going on, he cares about each and every one of us, and we should be thankful. And thank you for that reminder, and God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks so much, fellas. You're doing a wonderful job here, and it's people like you that are going to help to fix this world of ours. Thanks once again.
Well, thank you. So for Tom Rogers and my co-host Doug McBurney, I'm Fred Williams of Real Science Radio. May God bless you.